Welcome back to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, on this side of the program, we've got City Councilor Felix Arroyo, and everybody knows City Councilor Felix Arroyo. I mean, there was a poll that just recently came out with a 51% favorability rating. I believe that was Felix was the only one to top 50%. So a lot of you know Felix. You know what he stands for. He's a hard-working public servant, but he's here to talk to you and talk to me about issues of importance to you. So without any further ado, Felix.
Sheriff, thanks for having me on your show.
Really appreciate it. So how's it going before we get into the nitty-gritty? How you feeling?
Excellent. We feel great. You know, I'm an organizer, and our campaign is under that model, so we spend hours upon hours knocking on doors and making the telephone calls. We think that's the way you win this race. But we also think that's the best way to govern, in the neighborhoods, talking to people, real residents about issues that matter to them. And we're doing thousands of doors a weekend, and I do it myself. And we're out there door knocking, and it's just been really wonderful. The response has been great, and it energizes us every time we go out.
So let's start with the issues, and I know education is near and dear to your heart.
Sure.
So why don't we start there? Talk to us about education and where you stand on that.
You know, it's very personal to me, Sheriff. There's 5 in my family, 5 children, and all of us went to the Boston Public Schools. My mom is a retired Boston Public School teacher. My sister's a 2nd grade Boston Public School teacher. My wife's a 2nd grade Boston Public School teacher. My brother's a part-time Boston Public School teacher. And all of my nieces and nephews attend the Boston Public Schools. It's key for our family, and like most of the families who use the Boston Public Schools, the BPS was not an option. It is the option. It has got to work, and I have some ideas of how we get there. One, early childhood education matters. It's key. I believe in a universal pre-K. It shouldn't be those who are lucky to get in, and those who don't. Universal pre-K. Your child should have a seat. You want your child in pre-K, they should have a seat. We have to focus on early childhood education. I went into the 1st grade already reading and writing, but that's because my mom was a school teacher and taught me that. That put me ahead. Every year I was always ahead. We know it works, so we should have, I believe, 2 adults in the classrooms up until 3rd grade. Until 3rd grade, Sheriff, a child is learning how to read. From 3rd grade on, they are reading to learn. If they're not reading at 3rd grade, the rest of their time in schools will be difficult. How do we get 2 adults? My wife does it. She has a partnership with Simmons College. She always has a graduate student education in her classroom. 2 adults, no cost to the system. I also think we have to extend the school day, but to bring back arts, music, theater, phys ed, and sports. And I think we have to look at our curriculum in our high schools. I know this is near and dear to you because of the work you do. It has to be reflective of the world that they're graduating to, not the world that was there yesterday. Science, technology, engineering, math must be in our high schools, civics, so that they know that they have a responsibility and they can affect the decisions that happen in our city. Financial literacy. So many of our students graduate high school, they don't even know what a credit score is. You can't buy a house if you don't know what a credit score is. You can't open a business. We have to provide that. And then the last piece I'll touch on schools is college prep class. I believe it should be a mandatory class where the student applies for colleges, applies for financial aid, fills out the scholarships. Why? For most of them, they'll be the first or one of a few in their family to go to college. So we can't assume there's someone at home who knows how to do this with them. But it also tells each and every one of our high school students, we believe in you and we believe that you're college material, so much so that we have a class to help you get into college. And I think doing those things, we could turn our schools around. And I'll also add, I know I said last week, but I will add this. If you care about the state of our schools, this is the year to pay attention, because not only will we have a new mayor, we will have a new superintendent of schools. And other than the teacher and the parents, those 2 people will affect the education of that child more than anyone.
And that's what I was going to ask you. My next question was going to be, what qualifications are you going to look for in your new superintendent of schools?
So there's some basic facts about our school population. Now we have to understand 87% of the students in our Boston Public Schools are students of color. Over 70% of them qualify for free lunch, which is our lowest economic indicator in the schools. And then over 40% of them speak a language that's not English at home. It could be Spanish or Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean Creole, or Chinese, and the list goes on and on. We need a superintendent that values diversity, understands that different cultures, there are different people who use our system of different economic levels, but also believes that they all deserve a quality education and that they can all get a quality education, and that our school district should provide that. It's also someone who has experience, I believe, within an urban public school district, right? Boston, our Boston Public Schools, we can be national leaders on how we do education in an urban public school district. And we need someone who believes in our children, loves our children, knows they can learn, and believes in public education. Those are the qualifications I'm looking for. And the last, and one of the more important ones for me, is someone who also believes that we do better when we involve parents and stakeholders in our schools, believes in partnerships and including parents. Someone who has an organizer mentality that says for every child, there is an adult who cares about that child. And that adult needs to be involved as well.
So when you talk about partnerships, then talk to me about the BTU. Talk to me about the Boston Teachers Union with the changes, some of the changes that you've just talked about. How do you get them to partner, to collaborate in a meaningful way so that it flows perfectly for kids?
And I think a lot of perceptions people have about the Boston Teaching Union, whether they're positive or negative, come from a political setting. But at the end, I have never met a teacher who became a teacher because of the pay. This is not a profession you go into if you want to make money. No one says, oh, you want to make some money in life, why don't you become a public school teacher? No, they're in it because they care about those kids, because they care about education, because they believe they can make a difference that way. So you have to tap into that. You have to tap into that. What is the primary motivation for most, if not every teacher, which is believing that you can make a difference in that classroom. And then you have to bring the plan, and it requires buy-in. Leadership requires buy-in. It isn't just directives, right? It's about having a clear message, creating buy-in, having a plan, and then having accountability towards that plan. You have to create that buy-in, and I believe most teachers really want to excel in their craft. They want professional development, they want support, and they want you to recognize when they're doing well, and they're prepared to do what it takes. I'll give you a story in my own life, how I know this to be true. My wife, Jasmine, is a second grade teacher in the public schools. Her first year as a teacher, she walked into an empty classroom, Sheriff. When I say empty, it was completely empty. Dictionary definition of the word empty. I'm not exaggerating for points here. We had to put thousands of dollars into that classroom. I'm the proud owner of 25 hooks that the kids use to put their backpacks on, right? I own those. I know that she wasn't in it for the money. She put her own money into that classroom. But what would have happened if she couldn't? What would have happened? What would have they said about her ability to teach? What would they have said about those students in that classroom if they had no resources? So it's about making sure they have the resources to teach. And I think once you do that, you will be able to create buy-in. You can do some exceptional things in our schools.
Let's switch to public safety. Tell me where you stand on public safety, the real burning parts of public safety that jump out at you and jump out of the newspaper every day.
Sure.
How do you address those things?
First, as a very able sheriff of Suffolk County, and I'm proud of that you were appointed and that you're doing that work, I want to put you out of business, right? I want to prevent crime. My first step to public safety is not coming up with the plan to catch a perpetrator, which is important and key. It's that the crime never happens in the first place, because for every crime there's a victim, and you want less victims and less survivors of violence and survivors of crime. How do we do that? Opportunity. We have got to create opportunity in our neighborhoods. You know, when we look at the economic disparity that we have in our city, it also happens to be that our most economically depressed neighborhoods are the neighborhoods with the highest crime. There is, in fact, a relationship there. So one of the things I'm moving is an idea I have of how do we spread the prosperity in Boston. Boston's one of the richest cities in this country. But you don't have to be a genius to know that not every neighborhood benefits from that prosperity. As a city, we have $1 billion invested in banks. But we don't ask those banks if they do any lending in our communities, if they lend to any small businesses in our communities, to any homeowners in our communities, if they hire Bostonians, what are their plan around preventing foreclosures. I believe that if you want that money, that $1 billion in your bank, you got to be a partner with the city and with our neighborhoods. So the banks and the financial institutions doing the most work in our neighborhoods will be who we deposit that money with. That creates competition towards that, and therefore there'll be more economic opportunities. Second, we have got to deal with the state of our schools. But in the short term, see, those are long-term solutions. In the short term, we've got to go back to community policing. We have got to go back to that day of police officers walking in our streets and bicycling in our neighborhoods and creating relationships. We have got to create safe havens for our young people to be right now, because we know they're looking for safe places to be. And also, I think we have to look directly at the issues of mental illness and substance abuse. And we have got to say that I no longer want to send somebody with an addiction to the jail. I want to send that person and give them a bed where he or she can find recovery, where they can break their addiction. Because so many people in our jail systems, we know, are there for lack of education, lack of opportunities, a mental illness, and or addiction to substance abuse. You know that better than me. But I think I touched all the pieces that bring them there. Well, if we could look at all four of those root causes, then the result of crime gets lessened. So create relationship with our police so that we can deal with it now. create safe havens for our young people, look at mental illness and mental health, look at substance abuse, and then create economic opportunity. And I think that is how we deal with crime. The last thing, and you know this, you've said it a lot, so I'm actually paraphrasing you, but I want you to know I've heard you. We've got to create relationships amongst ourselves too, right? What's happening on your street matters to you, and what's happening in your block matters to you, and what's happening in your neighborhood matters to you. You create relationships with your neighbors and with those around you, you'll see less crime.
Where do you come down on Commissioner Davis? Would you keep him or would you bring in your own commissioner?
You know, I think he's deserved the opportunity to continue. We saw some very great leadership most recently around the marathon and how he stood as a leader. But I will say there are things I plan on doing once I'm mayor as it relates to our police department. I spoke about community policing and bringing community policing back and having more people, police officers walking the beat and bicycling. I also want that police department to be a diverse police department, a police department that reflects the neighborhoods in the city that they police. And I'm entirely committed to that. And I believe I could work with Commissioner Davis to do that. But in the end, that goal is a superseding goal for me, that we have a department that has relationships with our community. And I'm not saying they don't. There's lots of great officers out there who have great relationships with our communities, but we have to institutionalize that. We have to create community policing and then have a diverse department, not just at the patrol officer level, but also in the leadership.
Jobs, economy. How do you grow the existing businesses that are here, and how do you entice other businesses to relocate or to start here?
You know, I toured every small business district in the city. I've had the great blessing of being a city councilor at large. Now I'm in my 4th year, having run twice, and I represent every neighborhood. And so I took it upon myself to go to every small business district and every neighborhood in this city. And I found 2 things that the small businessmen and women said were pressing to them, that if we could figure it out, they could expand, they can grow, and we would attract more businesses. Access to credit and the permitting process. I spoke a bit about access to credit by using that $100 billion that we have in deposits as leverage to create more credit availability for our neighborhoods. And that, I think, will open up real opportunities. So if someone comes with an innovative idea, a brand new idea, they have access to credit because when a bank lends out some money here, they know that it's going to be points towards the deposits on this end. But then we also have to look at our permitting process, and are we a welcoming city? Are we a city that tells folks who have ideas, are we a city that tells someone who may want to open a restaurant, a full-service restaurant in Dudley Square, that this is a city that we're inviting you to do that? I know that the residents of Roxbury would love to see a full-service restaurant in Roxbury. I know that for a fact. And I know that there are people who would love to bring that to Roxbury. Well, now, we should be figuring out how to get that done. Instead, sometimes our permitting process gets in the way of progress. It isn't clear. There aren't strict timelines, and it's not understood by neither the residents or the potential business owner how to get through that process. We have got to streamline that thing so that it's open, clear, transparent as possible, and I think you'll see more businesses when we do that.
Well, then talk to me about the BRA and where you come down on the BRA, because when you talk about streamlining and making things crystal clear, oftentimes you will hear that you don't get that when you talk about or work with the BRA.
I understand that concern, and in fact, I agree with it. One of the things that I'm proposing to do is we have got to now separate the powers that the BRA has. And for the audience, the BRA stands for Boston Redevelopment Authority. It is both our development department as well as our planning department. But because it's an authority, it's a quasi-government authority, which means it doesn't even fall under the purview of the city council, and its budget isn't even necessarily public knowledge. So when you have development and you have planning under the same arm, you can fall into the case where the development leads the planning as opposed to the planning leading development. When development leads the planning, immediately community input